Hi, this is Eric Ritter with Strategic Financial Group and another edition of our Plan Smart, Retire Smart video series. I'm hoping this massive splint on my finger here is not too much of a distraction. Uh, Sadly, it's just the result of me throwing the football around with my kids and yet another reminder that I'm getting older every year. But what I wanted to do today is actually zero in on a specific part of our sequential formula, which of course is our proprietary process that guides our clients through reaching and achieving and really sustaining their financial goals. In one of our previous videos, I talked about the two halves of our financial life, namely the accumulation phase and the distribution phase. And you're going to fall into one of those two camps. And one of the biggest risks that we help our clients solve for in the distribution phase is what we call sequence of returns risk. Well, what is that exactly? When you think about what the market does over time, it goes up, it goes down, and hopefully over a long enough period of time, it generally goes up. When you're in the accumulation phase, like myself and other folks pre-retirement, it really kind of stinks to look at your statements that are down in value, but the reality is when you see significant market drops like we saw earlier this year in March and April due to the pandemic, it really actually is a great time, a great opportunity to buy stocks while they are down in value. When you're in the distribution phase, the story takes another turn, and actually it starts to work against you in terms of those downturns, because now you're no longer adding to your portfolio, but rather you are actually living off of that to create a paycheck in retirement and replace the income that you previously had from your job. And so the math actually starts to work against you in the distribution phase. You often hear financial media outlets and even financial advisors and their, the planning software that they use talk about average rates of return in retirement. What are we going to assume that your portfolio averages over time? But the reality is much more important than average rates of return are your actual rates of return. In other words, your specific sequence of return for you personally that you experience in the first 5 to 10, maybe 15 years of retirement. So again, much more important than average rates of return is what you personally are going to experience in retirement in the early years, and that's going to have a drastic impact on how your portfolio does over time. To kind of expand on this and maybe hopefully make it a little bit more clear, I'm going to actually walk through an example that will hopefully lay some additional foundation for this and add a little bit more clarity. Okay, so here you go. This is a tale of two couples. Meet the Luckies and the Unluckies. And their backstory is they've both done pretty well for themselves. Their goal was to retire at age 65, and they had, over the course of 30 to 40 years, accumulated $1 million in a retirement portfolio that they plan to use to live on and supplement some of their other sources like Social Security. And really what they're looking to do is pull out basically a 5% withdrawal rate adjusted for inflation. And so essentially they're going to pull out $50,000 each starting year one and adjust that for kind of a cost of living adjustment every year, and have that supplement some of their other guaranteed income sources in retirement. So when you look at this, really the unluckies, 19 years into retirement at age 83, they've essentially run out of money. And then you contrast that with the luckies, who at age 85, so you fast forward 20 years, they actually started with $1 million. They pulled out $50,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, and they actually ended up with over 5 million in their portfolio at that point in time. And so how is it that you can have two real, just drastically different outcomes? Well, it really has to do with the type of market environment that they each retired into. So I want to take a look at some of those numbers a little bit more closely. Here's really their sequence of returns. So we're talking about that, right? Sequence of returns risk. And here's each of their individual sequence of returns in retirement. So the unluckies retired. In this case, we just went back to 1969 and fast forwarded 20 years to see how the market did. And you can see their withdrawals there in this kind of middle column, and adjusting for a kind of a pretty moderate 2% rate of inflation each year. And here's their actual performance each individual year, and then their portfolio balance based on those withdrawals and that performance. And you can see that over the course of, again, 19 years, they end up actually running out of money when they're about 83 years old. And you contrast that with the luckies, who happen to retire into a more favorable market environment. They retired in 1982, and same withdrawal rates, same withdrawal schedule, same starting point, but you can see the significant difference here in terms of their portfolio value over time. And really, it's just a matter of two couples retiring into two quite unique, quite different market environments. Now, lest you think that this 1969 era to 1988 is kind of a one-off deal, really what you could do is fast forward another couple decades and really take a look at the most recent 20-year period. So if they had retired in the year 2000 and ran the same scenario, $1 million and pulling out 5% each year adjusted for inflation, I think what you get is actually a very similar outcome, because when you think about what happened in the first 10 years of that period, well, 2000 to 2002, we had the dot-com bubble. We had basically a 2-year recession there. We had 9/11, bunch of stuff, and the market actually dropped 53% from the peak to the low there over that course of time. Came back up for a few years, and then what happened? We had the financial crisis in 2008 and early 2009. And over that period, again, you're taking out these withdrawals, and I think you would run into a similar type of setup. So this is not a one-off scenario. We've seen this where you have rough patches in the market for 10 or 15 years, and that can have a drastic impact on someone's portfolio, especially when, like you're seeing here, they're in the distribution phase and living off of those assets. So this whole discussion around sequence of returns risk is not really about whether or not someone should be invested in the stock market. In fact, we believe most people should have some stock exposure with a portion of their portfolio in retirement. It's one of the best ways to offset another risk that we haven't even talked about yet, which is inflation. No, the bigger question here is, how do you avoid or minimize at least having to take $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 withdrawals from your portfolio when the market is down significantly? Because when you do that, as the unluckies did in the first, as you see here in this green area, the first 5 to 6 years of retirement, now those assets that they withdrew to live on to create a paycheck, they never have a chance to actually grow back in value and achieve that average rate of return that they initially expected for their investments. So there you go. Hopefully that illustration was helpful in explaining a little bit more what sequence of return risk is all about and why it's important for you to understand that. If you are interested in understanding a little bit about how we go about planning for that risk and addressing that with our clients, I'd encourage you to do two things. One, take a look at a previous video that Chris Tanke, our CEO and founder, did around asset allocation versus asset designation, and he talks about some of the concepts that we use to address that risk. And certainly, as always, I'd encourage you to reach out to our office and come on in for a complimentary second opinion on what you're currently doing and how to address some of the various risks that you are facing in your retirement. With that, we'll talk to you next time, and make it a great day.